preparation for the next one. So you've got this continuous circle. So on your LinkedIn diagram, you depicted the stages, and one of them was anticipatory or early action. Well, Cedric's looking for the slides. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the stages in this anticipatory action, early action? What are you seeing now with the increase in the number and the severity of disasters? And can you kind of tell the story that you told at WestCon?
What we're seeing is we went for a number of years post-Hurricane Hugo in 1989 until 2015 before another major event. Since that time, we have had at least 4 different declared events. And one of the things that I do with the South Carolina Office of Resilience is work with the nonprofit sector and voluntary agencies active in disaster and remind them that the majority of disasters that happen are not federally declared. So it is as important in your local communities now to have a VOAD or a community resource group or whatever you call it, because I'll give you an example. I had an emergency manager in Charleston. They are in the process of standing up this community partnership group. I saw him at a meeting. He said, "I wish I would have known this group was here a month ago when I was standing up my cooling shelter." So was that a federally declared event? No. Was it a disaster in the making for that community? Yes. So having these organizations work locally, and what we're finding too is historically what would happen is we would form these long-term recovery groups, we'd stand them up after a federal event, and then when the money went away, so did the VOAD group. What we're trying to change now is that mindset, that it becomes a more proactive group. And I'm glad Marcus is on this call because we are very great partners with the United Ways here in South Carolina. As a matter of fact, we have another meeting with them tomorrow to pitch another idea that we'd like to partner with. In the wake of government cutbacks and potential changes to FEMA, we realize how important those local communities are to not only disaster response, but disaster recovery. For us here in South Carolina, our disaster recovery for Hurricane Helene ends December 31st, 2031. So we are here for the long haul.
Excellent. Richard, you talk about preparation, blue sky versus blue tarps, and the Future Proofing America Network includes insurers, reinsurers, impact investors, which is a phenomenal addition to here. And there are also groups who are not often at the preparation table. So I shared with you the story. I was on a panel with the head of insurance for Columbia University. And she interrupted, we all had our claims, she interrupted. She said, "Kirsten, you don't understand how insurance claims work." I didn't tell her I've been at PwC for 10 years. So she says, "You don't understand. It doesn't start until there's a claim filed." I said, "Yes, and what if, like in Harvey, if you could have gotten money to your insured ahead of time, and they could have gotten sandbags, 60% of the water damage in Harvey was less than $4. Wouldn't it have been nice if your claims were reduced by 60%? So having the insurers and the reinsurers engage. Richard Sears.
So let me, and I know there are some slides out real quick. First off, Kirsten, let me thank you and all Cal Gates and others. Unfortunately, I'm managing a little bit of a health issue that I want to take care of here, but I very much miss being in person. Jim Albee is an indirect hero of mine in the work that he's done and others in the room. So I miss being there. That's number one. Number two, I am offended that I was called Batman. I'm often referred to as Vin Diesel Doom. Nobody laughed in the room.
Yes, we are.
So I'm going to start slightly different on this, only because you mentioned it and Francisco mentioned it. We are in this weird anniversary season, personally. And it's not a fun, for me, anniversary season. We just recognized, the word celebrate is not appropriate, but we just recognized the anniversary of Katrina. We just recognized the anniversary of Harvey. Here's the good news. A lot of us are still standing, but in reality, we're still tripping up over the same mistakes and lessons learned. And I'm stupid. I may be the only person in the room that's read every after-action report since Hurricane Andrew, of which some of you in the room don't even know what Hurricane Andrew is. Google it. But to be very point blank about it, the opportunity that's on the table, I believe Marcus knows and Mary Lou knows and all of you know, is we're in a very, very interesting moment in time, kind of whether we like it or not, to reframe everything that we've done in the past, to reframe it for something that is not only more lasting, but I think actually is more efficient, effective, and economical. So the liberty I'm taking is this. 500,000 cars were lost. Over 100,000 homes were destroyed during Hurricane Harvey. Became a multi-billion-dollar disaster, and now we're in this pivot. And here's what the pivot is, and I shared this with a lot of the board, so I apologize for it being redundant. Insurance rates are going through the roof. Mortgage defaults are also going through the roof. The devaluation of real estate across the country is falling. Taxpayers, elected officials are overwhelmed for having to go back to the well over and over again to constantly rebuild. All right? We have assets in this country that are critical for the stability of the economy, and sad but true, we recognized 4,000 census tracts across the country 2.5 years ago in a very bipartisan effort with Congress. And I'm saying bipartisan more than the infrastructure bill was. To recognize 4,000 census tracts that are most at risk and most in need, meaning high profile disasters and high low to moderate social vulnerability. All of us know this. Marcus knows this. All of us know this. But for the lack of some reason, we can't seem to make this pivot. And now I'll describe very quickly, Kirsten, that the pivot is underway whether we want it to or not. You cannot get insurance in many markets. If you cannot get insurance, you cannot rebuild, you cannot reconstruct, you can't do anything as it relates to your domicile. If I can't get insurance and I can't get my domicile, meaning my home back, then how the hell am I going to have a job? And if I can't have a job, it all becomes circular in this instance. So I'm advocating to play off of what your first panel talked about, and everybody hit the same tone. There is still, I believe, Mary Lou, and you can correct me and others in the room, I believe that we still have about $500 billion in presidential declarations still tied up in various states' accounts that have not still been deployed. That's the blue tarp syndrome that we're still trying to figure out. how to unlock some of that. But here's the other person to it is, we've identified $2.3 trillion of capital sitting on the sidelines, partly driven by some of the issues around ESG elements, but it is not a lack of capital to do what we need to do in this country. What is the challenge, I think, on the table is that between insurance, mortgage, traditional banking, significant amount of public, state and local public financing that we've tapped into, and the continuous interest of corporate philanthropy foundations and donor-advised funders, we have the capital to do this. What's missing are the governance structures to move this money forward. But I will tell you, and I promise I'll shut up for this moment, is what everybody is telling us is they want to lean forward into preparedness, risk mitigation, pre-disaster, whatever you want to call it. We call it future-proofing, because it's a 1 to 11 cost benefit to lean in. And there is where I think the opportunity is mentioned about pre-positioning, about set-asides. Here's the real gap, and I put this as a challenge, is God love FEMA and HUD and the rest of the federal agencies that I've worked with, all of y'all work with. I helped run Economic Development Administration when I had hair. The federal agencies have tended to be the first promise and last funded. And that doesn't work. Didn't work before, it's not going to work going forward. So this group, Assemble Today, has an opportunity to create a new framework today and tomorrow. I truly believe, Marilise, that doesn't have you and others in the VOAD world literally going hand in hand every damn time we have an event. Can I hear an amen?
Amen. What we're finding too is when we meet, particularly with the corporate sector, is the corporate sector budgets for hurricane or event response, but they don't budget for recovery. I've heard this over and over again with companies like Boeing, Duke Energy, Dominion Energy. They budget for response because it's in the news, it's right in your face. But what happens in years 2, 3, 4, and 5 when you're doing the heavy lifting? The funding is not there. Part of my job here with the Office of Resilience is to actually have these one-on-one meetings with these funders and explain that disaster doesn't go away when FEMA goes home. It doesn't go away when it's out of the news cycle. So I spend a lot of time at local chambers of commerce. I spend a lot of time doing a lot of corporate networking. And I mentioned the BOAC groups that we work with. One of the assets we tell them that they should have on their local groups is someone from the local chamber and the local business sector. And they'll go, well, why do we're doing disaster response and recovery, why do we need business? I said, well, why do we need to be involved with the chamber? I said, because that's where the business owners are. So making sure that those folks are brought to the table. Here in South Carolina, the Department of Commerce, along with the South Carolina Emergency Management Association, has convened a corporate working group that is being integrated in, and I'm trying to integrate that into the nonprofit sector groups. So they're working together in Blue Sky because they get tired of hearing me say the time to build these relationships is not when there's a storm 30 miles offshore. It's too late. Having these partnerships now that when the storm is approaching, and yes, there's one out in the Atlantic right now that we're tracking, is making sure that you can call these folks. And one of the things that's different about, Helene from past experience is this storm hit parts of the state that other than dealing with the occasional ice storm or people leaving Georgia to escape an oncoming storm, don't deal with hurricanes. So back in April, we had Spartanburg County dealing with Hurricane Helene, and we had Georgetown County on the coast dealing with 6 inches of snow. So all bets are off, and I like talking about the new normal because you can't take anything for granted anymore. You can't just say it's going to hit the coast.
Okay. Kirsten, Mary Lou and I are going to take over this panel real quick. This is just a conversation between just the two of us, okay? Just her and me.
Actually,
okay?
if Marcus has anything to say, he should go off mute.
Yeah. Marcus can hear us.
No, you missed it. You missed your opportunity. All right, back to you two.
Okay, so there's a little place called Mobile, Alabama. Mobile, Alabama sits on the coast, been getting hit by hurricanes and storms before it ever became Mobile, Alabama. The Mobile, Alabama happens to be where 3 major employers are building the next generation of the Navy and DoD vessels. Charleston, South Carolina, little place down the road, is another major military base with a large employment base. Mary Louise, what you just said is part of what I think I'm trying to encourage this group is in our talks with employers, they no longer can rely on FEMA, HUD, and SBA to get their employees back to work. It's not a selfish exercise. But look, when Exxon Mobil got their plant facility back up and going in Beaumont, Port Arthur, and 200 of their folks crossed the road to go take care of 500 employees to get them back up and going. We call this enlightened self-interest. Whatever you want to call it. If I cannot get my employees' roof repaired and fixed properly once and for all, if I can't help my employee become stabilized, I got a cascading set of events. Am I saying that right? So,
Absolutely.
so what we now have to do is not just look at payments as a lifeline for just the restoration and recovery. It really is a moment in time where I believe the billions, if not trillions of dollars that could lean in are looking for ways to deploy resources ahead of the curve. And that's not just Kirsten, oh, this makes me feel good.
Do you want the
We're
UPS story?
past makes me feel good.
Rich, do you want me to tell the UPS story?
Yes, ma'am?
So to his exact point, Payments as a Lifeline started off getting money to people in disaster, right? And UPS was part of the 360. We did a project, and weeks later, a tornado comes in and takes out their second headquarters somewhere on the East Coast. And the woman we work with there called and she said, "How fast can you help me get money to my employees?" And it's always on a Friday afternoon, right? And I said, "Well, with all due respect, they're your employees. Why can't you get them money?" And she said, "It's going to take us 3 weeks to get money to our own employees." And she said, these are drivers. They and their family have no place to go. You all know the stat, what is it? Less than 60% of Americans have $500 for a disaster. She said, literally, they have no place to go. So we said, well, can we do it on their phones, right? Push it, nope, it's got to be a plastic card. So that's on Friday. Wednesday, through a PaaL partner, we were able to drop ship this set of plastic cards, and the drivers from the next closest location handed these to their colleagues. It was amazing. So for anybody who's thinking that this is just to help disaster victims, it is for employees. There's another major brand, I don't know if I'm allowed to say what it is at the moment, but they gigantic restaurant conglomerate, and they have their own restaurants, and you know names, and they have franchisees. And so they have a program where either their own employees or their franchisees' employees can apply for disaster money. And their disaster could be that a tree fell on their own house. It doesn't have to be declared. And they too, it was taking them 90 days to move money to their own people. And now they do it in days. So this is big.
Person,
No, I was just going to add Delta as a similar program for the employees.
So it also has one of those a program too. So as you're out in your communities, any of these employers of any size, why it takes them months to get money to their own employees is not our issue. We can really help with all kinds of things. All right.
Kristen, can you show real quick, and then want to play off of kind of can you go to them? I think my presentation may be integrated. There's a map in there. I'm not sure. Okay, so I can't share my screen. There's a map that just came out by Axios, the new media company, and it essentially shows 2020 through 2025 distribution of FEMA individual and direct assistance by congressional district. You all don't even need to see the map. You kind of know where $50 billion and above color, kind of darker blue, right? It's on the I-10 corridor from California along the southwest through the Gulf Coast over to Florida. It's on the I-95 corridor, and it's part of central kind of Midwest, right? We know where these scenarios are perpetually and persistently happening. We know where the low to moderate income communities exist. What we are now, I think, merely saying to this group is that, and I'm going to say this politely, Kirsten, this group can no longer wait for the order. It really, I'm begging the opportunity, Mary Louise, and I think Marcus would say that United Way and others, is I think, again, we've got to go out and pull people forward to understand the enlightened self-interest is not on waiting till the event occurs. And I found, Mary Louise and others in the room, we started talking with United Ways and Red Crosses across the country, and their local boards started voting that they would, for the very first time, start leaning in with resources in advance of the next event, not just on recovery, because they're tired of kind of churning the mill, asking more and more for resources. So the infrastructure, Mary Louise, I think is there on the technology and the payments piece. What may be missing is, where are these quote unquote governance structures? Are they inside opportunity zones? There's these new resilient zones. California's got climate resilience districts. It seems to be that the states and locals are saying we need to kind of create some, and Mary Louise and Kristen and others, and making sense about where the world seems to be tilting towards.
Absolutely. We can no longer afford to be reactive to any type of disaster, whether it's local or federally declared. Communities, I love to say, all disasters start and end local. The only reason that the state or the feds get involved is when the capacity is beyond that local community. But if we help empower these local communities with the skills, we've been working a lot with the Red Cross to do local training on Things like case management, things like financial management, things like fundraising. Nobody really talked about that in the past with disaster. But because of the changing mindset, we cannot afford not to be proactive. If we wait until the next storm, we will never recover to the point where we were prior to the previous event.
So your insurance commissioner in South Carolina, which is what you and I are going to talk about, awfully, but it's a large, it's no secret. There's 24 state insurance commissioners who now personally have said, you know what, God love it. We've got this pricing issue, we've got this gap, we've got this affordability issue. So one example is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, which some of us will hear from tomorrow. But they've really proven out in Alabama the Strengthening Alabama Homes Initiative, which the state appropriates dollars, the insurance sector puts dollars, not your dollars, their dollars, and then, you know, the applicant brings dollars. And if you're below a certain threshold, there's another way to fund it. But what we have realized is, Mary Louise, is that 20% adoption of fortifying in advance is bringing down insurance costs in states and making it more affordable, especially for those who can't. That's number one. Number two is the insurance industry partnering with other local financial are realizing in certain places that this affordability gap for insurance also includes, sadly, that most people who should have it don't have flood insurance. Am I saying that right, Mary Louise? That
Absolutely. We hear that all the time.
and they're having to make a choice if you're in a low to moderate income range, all right? It doesn't, flood insurance is not really that expensive. It really isn't. And so, again, I think that it's not an either or, it's two sides of the same coin, Kirsten, for those assembled. And that is, don't stop doing what we need to do, post-event. And let's make sure that we can all strengthen that. But the reality is that the real lead-in now, especially with this federal devolution scenario, I sense is, to Mary Louise, what you said is, there's got to be some new partners at the table, and some of them want the show. But if you couch it in terms of the finding fiscal and societal benefits as a package, I think you're going to get a chance to reframe this conversation.
Well, and let me give you an actual example for one of our local community groups. I was meeting with the Marion County Long-Term Recovery Group, and they said, well, yes, since you've been here last, we've got this brand new manufacturing plant, and they've brought like 150 employees to school. Have you taken copies of the state hurricane guide and introduced yourself? They're like, well, why would I do that? It's like, first of all, chances are these people got transferred in from a part of the country that don't deal with hurricanes a lot. So you call up the HR director, you set up an appointment, you take copies of the hurricane guide that she or he can give out to their employees. So the next time they have an internal disaster, whether it's they're laying people off or if, heaven forbid, there's a mass shooting, who do you think they're going to call? It's a local group that they've already touched in another scenario.
I have something to add to that because we have our SBA friends in the room, and part of our strategic alliance memorandum is to work together on a disaster financial resilience toolkit for individuals and for small businesses that could be part of that. Mary Liz, I don't know if you can see it, but your slide is up. from Westmont.
Yeah,
And she was a hit at this conference, and it was full of states and counties in our audience. And so she was telling the story of how things have been, and now how they can be. Can you do your slide?
sure. Actually, can you go up one slide before we do that? Because I want to do the good news and then the bad news. Oh, sorry, I'm doing a conference presentation also. Bye. What happened is, in a past disaster, our disaster case managers had a partnership with the local food banks. At the time, I was the disaster manager for the largest food bank in South Carolina. So our disaster case manager chief came and said, can we do this again, this disaster? So what we did is we connected with Habitat for Humanity, who's doing a lot of our home repairs, so they would know when homes are being finished. We also partner with Feeding the Carolinas, which is the umbrella organizations for all the food banks in the state, and they coordinate with the 4 South Carolina food banks and the construction team. And before we ever did this, I come from the nonprofit sector, y'all, and if you don't bring some money to the table, I can guarantee what your response will be, and it will not be positive. So before I even approached this with Feeding the Carolinas, I had a conversation with the 1SC Fund, which is the largest private foundation for statewide disaster recovery. I went to them and asked them for X amount of dollars that could be used to restock these pantries. And I leveraged that gift with the Food Lion Corporation in North Carolina, and they're partnered with us to actually provide additional income. So you saw something that started very small, now has a statewide resilience. And that's one event. Okay, if we go to the next slide, that's the good news.
Just go to the next slide. Okay, Marcus is here.
There you go. This is what we deal with and what our disaster case managers, and we're a little different than most states. We have disaster recovery case managers who actually work for the state. We manage the FEMA DCFP grant. And right now we've got people who lost food due to lack of power. So you gotta get them some grocery gift cards, or a mobile food pantry out in their location. They're gassed out, the power generator has run out of gas, and so they gotta get some money to go to Quick Trip, or that's if the Quick Trip has power to put gas back in the generator. Your house got flooded and you forgot to take your medicines to the shelter. Okay, so now we have to find a pharmacy partner like CVS or Walgreens, or find local grant funding for a medical plan. And also the lack of transportation. Well, did you all know that Uber and Lyft actually does disaster recovery, as does Airbnb? I have learned so much in this disaster. But you can see how fragmented this is. And it's not only for the survivors, but it's also for the nonprofits who serve those survivors. So if we can do a better job coordinating in blue sky, rather than waiting until gray sky and that storm's 30 miles offshore, we can feel more confident. And the one thing I've heard over and over, particularly from some of our major funders, including the Red Cross, was we have money and we don't know where to send it. Now I have been trying to do my best to help them spend all of their money, but I have never heard that before in a disaster. That we can't push the money out fast enough. This is where your FinTech partners would be a godsend, not only to the state, but also to major funders like the 1SC Fund. And Kirsten, I think we introduced you to 1SC and you and Jim have met with them. So thinking globally, how do we support those nonprofits who also support the disaster survivors in addition to the disaster survivors?
Thank you for that. Marcus is here in person. And our schedule shifted a bit, so he was actually scheduled to be on time. But Marcus, we've got this graphic that you posted to LinkedIn a couple days ago. And I think most of us realize, okay, disaster hits, and you gotta go rescue people, and you gotta get them in temporary housing and reconstruct. But that whole left-hand side, that's the part that's, what, 3 years, 7 years? And making sure, especially that top left, the anticipatory early action. As soon as I put this up, everybody's taking pictures of it. So, probably about this.
Why? Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I wish I was smart enough to draw this out myself, but I borrowed that or uplifted it from our friends from the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction. I think the example actually that Mary just showed, I know the question was specifically about anticipatory early action. I think what both Mary and Richard have done throughout the course of the presentation I'm listening in, it spoke to a lot of the work that needs to happen beforehand to make sure that you're making sense of what happens afterwards. I'll say for United Way worldwide, and now I'll keep this primarily a domestic perspective. Many of our United Ways are asking the question, how can we take some of the things that we're known for in many communities as fiscal agents for long-term recovery groups post-disaster and really be a part of helping shepherd some of the work to help pre-position them. That's been worked a few times, but how can we help communities be thoughtful about how we can pre-position resources and specifically funding pre-disaster? Not going through just one organization. I know we have an incredible number of partners here from Church World Service, Operation Hope, and a few others who provide that direct financial assistance and other supports. And so I think, a big question that we are looking at in United Way is recognizing the unique role that United Way can help play, specifically from the economic resilience perspective, what the capabilities that it has, what's the type of partnership that's needed, not just with government, but also with the private sector, to look at how money's pre-positioned at the individual and household level. And some of that is going to be, right, having companies and corporations be courageous enough to say, we're going to give Church World Service, here's $1 million up front because we know we don't want to try to figure it out when the disaster happens in 50 or 60 years. $5 million up front because we know that while we can give away stuff, we ultimately know it's about people power. It is going to take that courage, I think, to really have to make sure that we are meeting the clip of disasters. I'll say the scenario that's been most salient for us as a network were the floods that started in July. So I know many of us have been thinking about praying for and working with communities that were impacted in Kirk County in Texas. But that quickly became an issue over the course of 5 days where you had floods, not just in Kirk County, but in adjacent counties throughout central Texas, floods that were in New Mexico, floods that were in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And everywhere you saw a flood, you saw a United Way, all asking the same question. And I think that is a little bit of what was just outlined in South Carolina. I think we can all learn from kind of Mary's example. It's those kind of models that I think we should continue to work with our corporate partners and our other partners for. I think this is where PaaL is going to be a very important thought partner to folks like the National Emergency Managers Associations, the International Association of Emergency Managers. This particular coalition is going to be that thought partner to help people think about what are the structures that are needed in place, but then also you all can give, especially for our private sector partners, give the real business case to counties and to states and communities to say, this is why it's important to make sure that the resources are positioned in a certain way. Unfortunately, kind of what Richard was talking about, nobody wants to go first, right? Nobody wants to get their money out too early. Nobody wants to be seen as the person that wasted resources, be it from the private sector or from the public. But our national board, I can't speak for the other national board partners, not on the board. I can tell you that we're going to be in trouble with the first big hurricane this year, in part because of the confusion from communities on how they can support survivors. And you're going to have many NGO groups in particular hesitant, not because they don't want to help, but they don't want to create unintended consequences for individuals and families that would have otherwise been eligible for services are no longer eligible because we helped too late. And so what we need is the conviction and the courage from the private sector, let me say in the short term, to work with us to make sure that resources are repositioned. But I'll say the opportunity that we have to Richard's point with Future Perfect America, I'm looking at 2026 as the opportunity for us as a coalition to go to state legislators, to go to state houses, to spend time with the mayors, to educate the kind of policies that are going to be needed to really meet the moment for the future disasters that are going to be impacting us. Because it's not slowing down, right? I think a lot of people in my office all month, people have been coming to me like, oh, it's kind of quiet, huh? And I keep telling them, like, stop talking, right? We're still in the midst of hurricane season. But I think what's true, and we've all seen this in 2025, it has been a very busy year for disasters, and it's hit us in the way that crises do, in a way that people didn't expect because they were looking at how disasters impacted the community last year. So from the wildfires in Los Angeles early this year, the wildfires that continue throughout the year, all the severe spring weather, I think that working with PaaL, working with the National VOAD, and even working with our partners that are working in the federal government, that education to our state and counties is a critical point, especially making sure that we can help them at least think through what kind of policies to get in place that can incentivize some of that repositioning. And United Way is committed to helping you do that.
And Marcus, I want to piggyback on something that you said. I want to piggyback on something that you said. When I first started this job, I met with an organization called Together SC. It used to be called the South Carolina Association of Nonprofit Organizations, or SCANPO. Their government relations person told me to my face, we have nonprofit groups ready to assist. We just didn't know who to call, and we were not going to self-deploy. We wouldn't be self-deployed. So we've been continuing to work with them. We are presenting at their conference next spring, but they are now considering a half-day pre-conference special session on disaster response and recovery so their nonprofit members know how they can integrate themselves into local VOAD or LTRG groups, and when the next disaster hits, they know who to call and they know how they can help.
All right, thank you. So we've got about 3 more minutes, and Marcus, the stage is yours.
Everything Richard said, amen. And you didn't hear me, I was in the car screaming amen. No, I think, and it to me, I mean, Mary's the future. So I'll say kind of where I want to settle with is Mary, not just as a person, but I think her position in the state is very much the future of where we need to be rallying our support as civil society to make sure that states have smart and thoughtful ways to make the necessary investments within their government. But then also we can talk about what Mary can teach all of us, right? What does it mean to support that team that's within a state government or within a county government that's really trying to pull the thread together under some very challenging circumstances to make the case for why we need to make sure that we're proactive in doing some of our work. So I'll say, I know that the panel is going to be a few more panels later, but I think the opportunity for me is we're going to do what we do best this hurricane season and for the rest of this disaster season. I think this room is going to be influential, really, like I said, for the various discussions that we're going to have in state houses within communities going into 2026, and there may be an opportunity. So like one of the things that I'll give FEMA credit for, especially recently, they are open, including the administration, to hearing good ideas on how things are going to work. There's a point of view that they have. Every administration has a point of view, but let's be clear that they are looking for thought partnership from the private sector, and let's not be shy about trying to find solutions that work. Federally, they're going to figure that out, but we can be just as aggressive and just as intentional on the state level. And Mary, I'm glad that you mentioned the Together, South Carolina Together. I know one of the groups, in addition to the National Volunteer Organizations After the Disasters, I know one of the other organizations that we're working with at United Way is the National Council of Nonprofits, which is very much trying to think about how they can be more intentional and thoughtful in supporting the broader network. So just thank you all for having this meeting. Chris, thank you for sticking with this and like really making sure that we can help move this up to the fore in other United Ways with the program.
Can I piggyback off the piggyback?
You got a minute, Richard.
I'll make it 30 seconds. I'm a big fan of everything that's been discussed, but I am an even bigger fan, and hopefully Marcus won't shock you when I say this. When I talk with CEOs, corporate side of the equation, one of the things I'm beginning to say to them is, you have to act like nobody else is going to show up. You're going to have to lean in and realize your employees, your operations, your facilities, and your infrastructure have got to have a resilience, preparedness, mitigation strategy. And by the way, you need to be thinking specifically about your employees and their families. Something is beginning to pivot, Marcus, something's beginning to pivot. So I'm a big fan of us finding a way to identify some pilots where the private sector leadership is realizing it is in their enlightened self-interest economically and financially to do what we're talking about.
Excellent. Marks, hopefully you can stay for a bit. Thank you to our panelists, please.
We appreciate our partnership. If anyone has any questions, please reach out. I think Kirsten and I have each other on speed dial. So please let us know how we can help. And if you'd like to come and visit some of the things we're doing here in South Carolina, come on down.
Excellent. We'll have a drink for you at happy hour. Thanks, guys. Bobby and Kevin. Kevin, you're up.
Watch your